I'm ready. David, let's do it. All right, everyone, welcome to, first of all, good evening, and welcome to the Wednesday evening program entitled Together in the Lonely Night with David Alder, to my left, whom I will introduce. Yeah, he's already, wow. Maybe I don't need to introduce you. I was going to say I need to introduce you in a moment, but first allow me to introduce myself. My name's Charles Stang. Most people call me Charlie. In my day job, I'm a professor at Harvard Divinity School, where I teach early Christianity and the philosophies and religions of the ancient Mediterranean world. I'm also very privileged and proud to serve on the board of trustees here at Esalen. But I'm here this evening in a very different capacity, as a co-host for a conference entitled The Psychedelic Turn, Mind, Matter, and Method. The other co-host is my dear friend and colleague, David Presti, who is here in the front row. David, please raise your hand. Who apparently also needs no introduction. David has been on the faculty of molecular and cell biology at UC Berkeley since 1991, where he has taught literally tens of thousands of students biology, psychology, and cognitive science. And for more than 30 years, David has been working to shift education and policy related to psychedelics. As a result, he's now a member of the executive committee of the newly established Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics. For my part, and in collaboration with Esalen, I've been hosting an online series called Psychedelics and the Future of Religion through Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions. So it's truly a pleasure to be with you this evening. This Wednesday evening program offers us the opportunity to share some portion of our CTR conversation with you all, community members and visitors, guests. And David and I could think of no one better to deliver on that opportunity than David Alder. David Alder is an artist and storyteller whose work focuses on psychedelics, movements of healing, and the edge of cultural change. David published We Will Call It Paula, his first graphic novel, in 2019, depicting a commercial psychedelic future gone awry. The story went viral within the psychedelic field and became an example against which the behaviors of psychedelic companies are measured to this day. Of David's follow-up story, In the Light of Dying Stars, Tim Ferriss said, "If you have any interest in psychedelics or the psychedelic ecosystem, I consider this story to be required reading." David is the co-founder of the North Star Project and co-author of the North Star Ethics Pledge. He lives on the road with his partner Sydney and runs his storytelling house, Here and Now Studios, full-time. Wonderful. Welcome again, and Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Charlie. Quick mic check, audio for the back. Can you guys hear me okay? Fantastic. Thanks again, Charlie, David, Esalen. I stand here with a sense of reverence for this place. I feel its history. I sense the presence of generations of people who've gathered here, found nourishment, fellowship, and inspiration, dreamed of a better world, and worked to chart a course of how to get there. When I think of the great figures of psychedelic history who have spoken from this place, I feel keenly aware of the example they have set. We stand on the shoulders of giants at a critical time in history, when the need for catalysts of change may have never been so great. I feel Esalen is one of the spiritual centers of the movement for a better world. To be standing before you now, in this sacred place, in the room named after the man whose books have changed how I see the world, is one of the great honors of my life. For this and so much more, I owe a deep debt of gratitude to some of the people sitting here today. I will be forever grateful for the ways you've helped me grow. As I walk my path in life, I will carry your wisdom with me. and do my best to follow the remarkable examples you have set. Two weeks ago, I lay on the floor, too overwhelmed to move. I was in my friend Gavin's apartment. I was caring for his dog, a golden retriever named Zuzu, while he was away for work. I could feel my organs pressing into the inside of my rib cage. For more than a month, my spleen and liver had been enlarged. In that time, the swelling and the pain had gotten worse. There was a mass on my left rib cage asymmetrical to my right. My skin was pale. My eyes were sunken. I was tired in a way no amount of sleep could shake. It was winter in New York City, 20 degrees outside and already getting dark. I shivered on the floor. Zuzu lay down next to me. She placed her chin against my arm. I stroked her neck. She panted steadily. 7 days earlier, my primary care doctor had called me. She said, "I've looked at your ultrasound. Your spleen and liver are enlarged. You're showing signs of anemia and jaundice. We don't know any more than that." She wrote me a referral for a gastroenterologist and a hematologist, as well as an X-ray and a CAT scan. Her tone was somber. "Hopefully we'll know more in a couple days." Then she hung up. I thought, I'm 30 years old. How can this be possible? The earliest imaging appointment at the radiology center was 4 days later. It would be several more days for the results. Finally, tomorrow, 8 days after I heard that news, I would have the gastroenterology and hematology appointments to review the new test results against a list of possible causes, almost every one of which involved some kind of cancer. In the middle of that discomfort and the pain and the fatigue was the uncertainty. The first day of not knowing was brutal. Now it had been a week. My symptoms were still worsening. I felt my mental health was tipping off a ledge. I wasn't sure I could hold on. I shifted slightly. I felt my ribs grind into my spleen. It was a bloating, burning ache, as constant as a pulse. With it came the scene that kept playing before my eyes, the one we're all afraid of, where a stranger in a white coat under white lights tells us we have cancer. Your liver is failing. The tumor has metastasized into your blood. I had spent a week trying to drown this image, trying to tell myself I didn't know yet, I couldn't be sure, trying to stay present, racing between medical appointments as I failed to meet a deadline for a corporate client and did not know how I would pay the bills. As I lay on the floor, my hand kneaded into Zuzu's golden hair, something tipped me off the edge. Maybe it was the look in Zuzu's eyes, the creature I was supposed to be caring for, looking at me with such obvious concern. The sadness came up so fast, it seemed to take the ground away. I tried to force back the thought that had chased me for a week. It crashed over me, and I felt tears come to my eyes. I whispered, "I hope that I'm alive." My body racked with sobs. I'm 30 years old. My spleen felt like it was bursting. I shook and retched. I let go of my last piece of holding on. At that moment, I could not remember what I had been striving for. My professional aspirations, my reputation, even the stories that have been the work of my life, none of it was left. It was like I was looking at them all through someone else's eyes. Someone who was sad for the young man who had spent his short time on earth thinking any of it could be important. I had one longing. It was for time. My body, once a day for the past week, I had made my way to nearby Prospect Park. For a few minutes, I would stare at the frozen lake. I'd watch the seagulls soar above the ice. I would take in the shadows of bare tree branches as they swayed across the earth. I'd see the land painted with the dying light. I'd think about the woman I love, now overseas in Europe, how far I was from her and what I would give to be with her now. This was what I thought. I'm not ready to let go of all of this. There, on the floor of my friend's apartment, with Zuzu at my side, I cried until my body shivered. When that made my swollen organs hurt, I cried again. The sadness was not that I could be dying. It was that I knew I had not learned how to live. I kept thinking, how could this be? How could I only see this now? I have spent my life at the edge of cultural change, dreaming of what it could mean to build a better world. I have spent my time telling stories that explore what it really means to heal. I have created protagonists who themselves don't know, who in the name of healing end up doing harm. How did I then get here, to the lowest point of my life, the day before I could learn I only have days left, only to realize that through all this time, I had not been living well? That as I raced ahead at this critical time for psychedelics and our species, I had been asking the wrong questions and chasing answers to the wrong ideas. And that through all the ways I'd thought about the future, weaving those realizations into stories about characters with tragic flaws, I would reach this point only to realize I was the same as the characters I'd made. I will come back to this moment. I promise I will not leave the story there. But for now, I want to provide some context on how I got there and why these realizations hurt so much. I arrived at the psychedelic field right as the first wave of commercial interest began to crest. My first psychedelic conference, Chacruna's 2018 Cultural and Political Perspectives on the Contemporary Psychedelic Movement, came just days after a pharmaceutical company filed the first patents for psychedelic intellectual property. It was a watershed moment for the field. It marked the turning point in the energy that had shaped psychedelics for decades, one rooted in the belief that psychedelics should be brought to the world for the benefit of all, a belief embodied by so many, including the late, great Sasha Shulgin, who created hundreds of novel psychedelic compounds and gave them all away for free. In the coming days, after that conference, the tension over the future of the psychedelic field would boil over in so many ways, foreshadowing what would happen in the years to come. In the wake of Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, which stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for over a year, a new energy was beginning to arrive, the hint of which could even be felt at that very conference, where for the first time, venture capitalists were in attendance with active investments in what they would begin to call the psychedelic space. Everything was about to change. I didn't know any of that yet. Instead, my first impression of my first psychedelic conference was very different. What struck me was a feeling. I looked around at underground guides, clinicians, and researchers, drug policy advocates, psychedelic elders, and indigenous people, gathering with many perspectives and one loosely shared prayer that in some way these medicines could help us heal. I knew I had never been in a room with so many people committed to building a better world. Perhaps most striking was how different the energy from that conference was from the trade shows I'd been in natural foods, the industry that I just left. A single moment ended my 5-year career in natural foods. It happened a few months earlier. I was riding up a 2-story escalator, flooding with 100,000 other people into the Anaheim Convention Center for the largest natural food trade show, Expo West. As the escalator began to climb, I saw that next to it, posted every few feet, were the brands that had exited that year through an initial public offering or acquisition by a corporate food conglomerate like Nestle or Coca-Cola. Every few feet, it would show the brand's logo and the price. This natural soda, $190 million. That energy bar, $300 million. That superfood salty snack, $700 million. As the escalator rose, the size of the exits only grew. I felt a physical response in my body. I sensed it in the people around me too. Heart rate quicken, fists clench, adrenaline rise. By the time the escalator reached the top, people practically ran into the convention hall, business cards in hand. It was gold rush energy. 100,000 people charging into the heart of the industry as if saying all at once, time for me to get mine too. In that moment, as I felt my body tighten, my fantasies of success began to run. I thought of the brands I could create, right in line with the latest fads in health and wellness, and how someday soon it would be my company's logo on that escalator. I reached the top. The convention hall was waiting, just through an open double door. Then I felt something shift deep down. It struck me like a whisper, barely audible above the noise. I found myself thinking why I had come to natural foods. My sense that we were hungry for a form of nourishing that was deeper, the kind that may come from gathering, preparing healthy food, and sharing it together. When I looked at the scope of my dreams today, that I would create the energy drink of the future with adaptogenic powder and a new form of caffeine, with a little less sugar and a much higher price, ripe for Pepsi, who now lagged in category innovation behind Coke. At that moment, at the top of the escalator at Expo West, I realized I had never felt further from the land. I decided then the natural food industry could not bring the form of healing that we need. I began to reckon with the fact that somehow, in participating in this industry, I had lost myself along the way. I knew then that I had to leave. A few months later, as I stood at that first psychedelic conference, I wasn't yet thinking that the energy that had turned the Back to the Land movement into the natural food industry had arrived in psychedelics. Instead, as my friends from Natural Food texted me photos from Expo East, which happened to be the same weekend, I realized how different the energy was here. I looked around the room. I can only describe it as the feeling that comes from giving someone a gift, not what can I take, what do I have to share. As I sensed this energy wash over me, I felt I'd finally found my home. Then Bob Jesse stepped onto the stage and introduced the open science statement. I learned a wave of commercialization was crashing over this place. I looked around at the room of healers. I felt their sense of hope at the possibilities of a psychedelic future. I wondered if they knew what would happen if psychedelics came to look like natural foods. I thought, I've seen this film before. I know how it ends. The theme of Expo East that year, the theme still defining the natural food industry today, was called Better For You. A friend texted me a photo of an entrepreneur who had made a chip identical to Pringles, but with kale powder sprinkled on top and a little bit less fat. A sign over his booth said, "Join the healthy revolution." As I looked at the healers in the room where I now sat, I wanted to share my sense that the energy now arriving risked making the psychedelic movement also produce a better for you world. I didn't know how I could share that message. I felt it couldn't be an academic article. No offense. It wasn't just about ideas. It wasn't just about ideas. It was about a feeling that instead of psychedelics creating a needed cultural transformation in a time of war, inequity, and ecological collapse, they could instead end up making a world at best better for you, than the one we've built before. As I thought about how to share that message, I had a dream. In it, a little girl is standing in Times Square in my native home of New York City. Every surface and every screen is plastered with psychedelic ads. This was the future I felt that we would see, one where everything that's profane about the world we've made is woven into the way psychedelics are delivered. How would it feel if you were one of the healers at that psychedelic conference, or one of the elders who carried the knowledge of psychedelics through the long, dark days of prohibition, to know that that might happen after all your work? That dream became the first illustration for what became a work of graphic fiction, in an effort to show how it would feel to experience a commercialized psychedelic future gone awry. In mid-2019, as I set out to create that story, only one thing felt clear to me. It couldn't just be a word of warning. It had to be a love letter to the psychedelic experience, to what psychedelics have meant for so many people's lives, to the pain in the world, to the prayer that we can be the last generation that looks out at a world we feel is getting worse. That was the story I had to tell, the story of the world we'd made, one of pain and beauty. I named the story We Will Call It Paula, in reference to the name of the utopia in Aldous Huxley's book, Island, and the idea that though we think we're building a utopia, what we get could be very different instead. In the story, the protagonist decides to start a scaled psychedelic clinic business. She's empathetic and compassionate. She has a deep conviction she's doing it for the right reasons. Early in the story, the protagonist, Leary, writes down her vision for her company. When a patient walks into Gaia Health, she will feel that she belongs. The feeling will be a sense of comfort, of being loved and held, of safety. If Gaia Health lives up to its potential, then these patients will carry that feeling with them when they leave. Gaia Health will be a sanctuary. Someday, we will have a treatment center in every city. In small towns, we will have outposts, ensuring that everyone who could benefit from sacred medicine will have access to it. If we become known for anything, it will be for our care and compassion for the people whom we treat. Gaia Health's first patient, a woman who had sought psychedelic treatment after experiencing sexual assault, writes Leary a letter a few months later. Dear Leary, for the first time in over 10 years, what was a prison of gray walls now seems to have a window. Light is streaming in, warming my face, warming my body, telling me that I am loved. On the other side of that window is the life I could have been living all along. Each day since that journey, the window has been growing. Someday it may be big enough for me to climb through. 3 months ago, I breathed deeply for perhaps the first time in my life. It is not enough to say thank you. This wasn't a favor. It wasn't even a gift. It was a blessing. There's grace in my life today. I think you know what I mean when I say everything is. It is, it is. But you made this, and this has changed my life. With love and admiration, D. In the span of 2 months, 4 competitors launch across the country. Leary starts seeing advertisements plastering New York City subways promoting services like hers at a fraction of the price. It quickly becomes clear that Gaia Health has a problem. As the competition grows, the wait list disappears. The company is nowhere near to meeting its projected growth rate. They have to cut costs, increase profits, and find a way to raise more funds. Leary increases the number of patients they take. She makes the treatment cheaper. She shortens session supervision. She spends more on marketing. She starts offering bonuses for referrals and discounts to patients who book a second session as they're finishing their first. She cuts preparation significantly and integration almost completely. She abandons her plans to facilitate community over the long term. She starts affiliate marketing and selling third-party health and wellness products on commission. She begins to frame psychedelics not as a one-time treatment, but a lifelong protocol. Seeing the changes at the company, the psychedelic community responds. Some in the psychedelic community accused Leary of conducting treatment on a dose-and-run basis. One particularly hurtful note read, "You're lining them up like cows, milking them, and kicking them out on the street." Folks kept saying what people really needed were community and belonging. What the market said they wanted was psychedelics. Gaia Health did not promote it as such, but it was clear that the cultural perception of psychedelics was something of a miracle drug, a practical cure-all for the fissures that may form throughout folks' lives. It was such an American idea, a society obsessed with a one-pill solution, one pill for the body that you want, one pill for your mind. In the beginning, Leary was sure the real work began after the psychedelic treatment, integration with a capital I. But this was hard to facilitate. It was even harder to monetize. Gaia Health was still grappling with how to do it when they were overwhelmed with demand for psychedelic treatment itself. That was straightforward. People genuinely seemed to be helped. The economics were incredible. As the industry exploded and the competition intensified, the pressure the protagonist faces only grows. Night after night, Leary would still be in the office in the early morning. She would be bent over her computer, bleary-eyed, thinking, "I have to find a way." Then Gaia Health would be running out of cash. Investors would be panicking. The competition would be making gains. She would look at what she was doing. A plan to match the competition by shifting psychedelic treatment to mail delivery and virtual care. A cash flow assessment of the fewest prescribing clinicians Gaia Health would need to have on staff. A legal review of whether those clinicians needed to be in the United States or could be in the developing world instead. And whether Gaia Health could pay bonuses based on the number of prescriptions they approved. Contingency plans for if a patient committed suicide. A cost-benefit analysis of whether to pay off the family or fight in court. A marketing campaign promoting the service to anyone who searched, "Is this all there is?" Filtered for if they had health insurance. By the time Leary wakes up to what happened, it's too late. Gaia Health has spiraled out of her control. It has developed an ego of its own, acting in self-preservation as if it were a human. She learns there's one difference. There's no medicine strong enough to blow a corporation's mind. When Leary puts her foot down, after many rounds of compromises and concessions, she is forced out. The company's board brings in a different CEO, a specialist in corporate acquisitions who can prepare Gaia Health for its exit. We will call it Paula ends like this. Leary went back that same day to the field where the oak tree still stood, older now, a little stooped. She brought 3 things with her: her journal from her youth, the page of the Financial Times announcing the Gaia Health acquisition, and 200 micrograms of LSD. At some point, somewhere, some hours later, Leary rolled over on her back. Above her, the leaves of the oak tree rustled in the breeze, swaying softly to some unheard song. Leary fumbled to the last page of her childhood journal. There, on the yellowing liner of the back cover, she scrawled the thought that had carried her through her trip. What would I have done if I had known that this would happen? When my producer, supporter, and friend Kat Konauer and I published the story, we didn't know if anyone would read it. Kat emailed it to a few dozen people in her network. That was all we ever did. We were completely unprepared for everything that happened next. Within 24 hours, over 2,000 people had read the story. Then We Will Call It Paula went viral in the psychedelic field. Kat and I got hundreds of emails. Among them, over 50 psychedelic entrepreneurs reached out, an amazing number considering it was 2019. They said, "Your story resonated with me deeply. I see myself in your protagonist. I don't want to repeat the same mistakes. What do I do now?" The momentum from that story swept us right along. This was how, a few months later, we found ourselves working on North Star, an initiative that would help create a psychedelic industry that was regenerative and just. Much can be said about my experience at North Star. For now, I'll simply say this. I am not sure whether its vision was ever possible, but I do know that I failed as interim executive director. Not only did I fail to achieve the organization's mission, for the second time in my life, I lost part of myself along the way. It started early on, when in the wake of We Will Call It Paula's success, I found myself completely starstruck as some of Silicon Valley's most influential figures told me they loved my story, that it reached them in their heart, that they were amazed by what I'd done. As I threw myself into my work, I felt the pressure rise. North Star could hold an event and most of the companies in psychedelics would show up. If you ask a room full of those people if they care about integrity and ethics, every hand goes up. But all of these entrepreneurs faced the same pressure as my protagonist in We Will Call It Paula. They all had competitors who seemed to be willing to do whatever it took. A pattern emerged. The entrepreneurs most concerned with acting in alignment with their values were the ones who moved the slowest. The others raced ahead. This led to a perverse condition where the appearance of ethics was more important than being ethical. I was talking to an investor once about his decision to pass on one of the first psychedelic pharma companies. He said he chose not to invest because he didn't agree with the company's approach. He knew that its leadership had been deceitful and broken many relationships, exploiting the ethic of psychedelic service, acting in ways that could hurt the field and limit access to psychedelic treatment. He said, when it came to that investment, he was proud that he had passed. Then that company went public at an incredibly high valuation. In a few short years, early investors saw a 20x return. When I saw that investor again, I asked him how he thought about it now. He looked sad. He said, "I'm not sure I did the right thing. I could have 20 times the capital. Think of all the good I could have done." Then he added, "Besides, the fact I passed did not matter at all. There's always someone willing to invest. In the end, what difference does it make?" That company showed how quickly ruthless capital can multiply, with 20 times the money to fund the next 20 companies that would carve a path to psychedelic riches. The closer I got to these dynamics, the more I wondered whether any form of scaled psychedelic business could bring the form of healing that we need. I saw the forces shaping psychedelic business were the same that had shaped natural food, the same shaping capitalism itself, forces of fear and greed and ego, forces, it could be said, created the root cause of the mental health crisis psychedelics purportedly would treat. In that setting, even the air we breathed was toxic. When you're in it, You don't realize what it does. You become conditioned to walk into a gathering of strangers and quickly screen out everyone who has nothing to offer you. Whole books are written about how to put yourself in front of the people who will help you advance, and how to disengage quickly from the ones who won't. The people most adept at this then stand on stage and talk about the worth of every human being, then tell us what we need to do to heal. I wish I could say that was never me. I wish I could say in writing my stories I exorcised those demons, that I could see this dynamic so clearly, and in seeing it, found a way to break that pattern in myself. Instead, I would soon act in a way that showed how strongly those same forces were controlling me. For almost a year, I had struggled to figure out what lever North Star could pull to change the incentives in psychedelic business, to create that industry that was regenerative and just. Then I came up with a new idea, a key initiative that I thought could have the power to shift the energy of the emerging industry. It came when we needed it the most. Our nonprofit was short on funds. Pressure was mounting. I was starting to worry we would fail. Finally, our opportunity had come. Then, almost as soon as I shifted the organization's strategy in that direction, I learned that another organization in the psychedelic field was planning something similar, that they might even be ahead in the process and ready to roll out their version of the impact initiative before we could. There are so many reactions I could have had to that. I'm ashamed to say that what I felt was fear. I thought, what if they are the reason ethics are centered in the psychedelic industry? What would that mean for North Star? What would that mean for me? It was then that I realized I had become just like my protagonists. In the desire to race ahead, I had lost a piece of myself again, so much so that I was willing to stand in the way of the world I want if it would not come from me. I could publish social commentaries about the misaligned incentives of psychedelic business. I could create characters who, in the name of healing, end up causing harm. I could share big ideas of how we could build a better world, but time and again, I could not show the courage to move through this world in a way that showed a better world was possible. For the second time, I knew I had to leave. This has been the story of my life, to work at the edge of cultural change, calling for a world I have failed to show is possible. These failures haunt me to this day, more than a year after I left North Star and said I will never make that mistake again. We come back now to the story I began with, the story of how 13 days ago I reached the lowest point of my life, the story the end of which has not been written. As I lay on the floor, minutes before I would collapse, Zuzu nuzzled me with her nose. I rubbed behind her ears. I felt she too was trapped here, in this 7th floor apartment many blocks from the nearest park, her days spent in lonely waiting. Zuzu, I said, as I stroked her neck, one day, Sydney and I will have a little bit of land somewhere when she is back from Europe, and somehow our lives and the world feel a bit more stable. Gavin will bring you to visit us. We'll spend the whole day playing. I'll chase you everywhere. We will both feel free. I knew I had been close to crumbling. I didn't expect this thought to break me. The idea that somehow playing with this beautiful dog on a little bit of land, just an afterthought in the big plans for my life. Yet in the broken, open lowliness, this was all that I had left. Not that I would change the world. Not that I would be influential in my time or remembered after I'm gone. That I would get to live a quiet life on a bit of land, beneath the trees and sky, my arm wrapped around the woman that I love, this beautiful dog running through the field, reminding us of the miracle we are alive. As I lay on the floor in the heart of winter, I felt Zuzu was as trapped inside as me. I could not reckon with the fact that I had still not become the person I always felt that I could be. That if tomorrow I learned my death was near, I would reach it realizing that despite everything, I had still not learned how to live. The thought that came to me then was that in the search for answers to big ideas, I had lost track of the questions that mattered most. Not, what do I do to change the world? What do I do to heal myself? How do I stop moving through life leaving violence in my wake? How do I do enough with my pain to meet other people in their own? Words came to me. I started a voice recording on my phone. God willing, the day I make it through this health crisis, this recording will be the greatest gift that I could have. I will play it now for you.
I'm lying on the floor, and I was talking to Zuzu, and I was telling her about how the day I look forward to the most is when Gavin brings her to Sydney and my land in the Hudson Valley, and she runs around in the field, jumps in the creek, just has the best time. And then I got really sad. I started to think about how scared I am. And how it feels to not know if I'm going to be okay. And what I would think if they told me tomorrow that I'm dying of cancer. Which is that I spent most of my life not knowing what's important. And I think most people do the same. I would think at that point, I thought I had more time to get it right. And somehow, I thought racing ahead would get me there. It's so sad to figure that out. Too late.
This is my prayer for you, that the day you face your death, you will not feel as I thought when I was facing mine. That when you reach your end, your soul rests easy, for you know that despite everything, whatever else may come, you found a way to fill the world with love. Thank you.